Support for Wavemakers comes from listeners like you and the Tampa Bay Times. The Pulitzer Prize-winning newspaper is available around the Tampa Bay area and online at tampabay.com. Thanks to the Tampa Bay Times for their support.
Today we bring you an encore presentation of Wavemakers. Janet and Tom will be back with a new show November 14th. We are not taking calls this hour.
Good morning and welcome to Wavemakers with Janet and Tom, a weekly conversation with people making a difference in the Tampa Bay area. I'm Janet.
And I'm Tom.
And answering the phones for us today is Irene. If you want to join our conversation, you can call us at 813-239-9663 and she'll get you through to us. You can also email us at dj@wmnf.org or text us at 813-433-0885.
Today's guest has been making waves at the intersection of race and media for decades. First around the Tampa Bay area and Florida, and now across the country as NPR's first TV critic. NPR even lets him work in St. Pete, where he's lived since 1995, when he became pop music critic for the St. Pete Times. He was later TV critic and editorial writer. He's a fellow at the Poynter Institute and serves on the board of Creative Pinellas. Eric Deggans is also the author of Race Baiter, How the Media Wield Dangerous Words to Divide a Nation. Welcome to Wavemakers, Eric.
I saw what you did there, man. You know, the wave, making wave.
You got that?
See, that's why you guys are. That's why you guys are here. You are radio pros. I dig it.
Well, maybe amateurs, but you're the real pro, and we're glad to have you here.
Glad to have you here. I mean, there's a lot to talk about.
Be here.
Yeah, a lot to talk about. Let's start by going back a decade when you published Race Baiter.
Mm-hmm.
That was 11 years ago, about a little bit more than 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Has anything changed since then? Some of the observations that you made in that book?
It's gotten worse.
Okay.
Just about everything.
That was what I thought when I was reading it over the weekend. I was like, oh my God.
There's a chapter about diversity in scripted television, and that's gotten better. So at least we can say that.
Oh, but that's gotten a lot better.
Basically, I was writing about the dynamic of media outlets using prejudice and stereotypes and racism in particular to fuel their fortunes. And of course, that's only gotten worse. And especially in the case of Fox News, which has kind of pioneered this practice, they've gotten more obvious about it. You know, I keep threatening one of these days to write a column that would say the death of the code word, because we're almost to the point where people just won't even use code words anymore, and they'll just come right out. And by people, I mean Donald Trump. But they'll just come right out and say what all the prejudice that is simmering underneath the surface. And when I wrote the book, Newt Gingrich, who was running for president at the time, would make a speech and call Barack Obama the nation's first food stamp president. What the heck does that mean? He would say it meant that more people used food stamps under his administration than any previous. And of course, he would sort of omit the fact that Barack Obama first took power as the economy was disintegrating in the Great Recession. So, of course, a lot of people were going on food stamps. And instead, he wanted to make this connection between food stamps and race and the first black president and all this terrible stuff. Well, now, people just sort of come right out and say, we're scared of transgender people, and, we think America's black and brown dominated cities are filled with crime and terribleness, and, the code words are going out the window.
And slaves learned useful skills.
And slaves learned useful skills, personal benefits, in addition to, and what's so, I went on Florida This Week, of course, and talked a lot about those education standards, and what's so scary about that is that there's just little nods inside those standards to previously unacceptable views about slavery and about the history of race relations in the state and in the country. And once you give a little nod, then it just grows. As my book shows, when these media outlets can make money with these little nods towards racism, then of course they get more and more outrageous in order to draw people's attention. And then you get to today where things are just barely veiled at all.
Tell us about where the title of the book comes from.
That's an interesting story. So a while ago, I got an email from a reader. I was working for the Tampa Bay Times at the time, then the St. Petersburg Times, and I got an email from a reader saying, "Did you know that Bill O'Reilly was talking about you last night?" And I was like, "What?" You know. So Bill O'Reilly, who was then the biggest star at Fox News, had done this whole talking points memo commentary where he talked about how white people can't talk to black people about race anymore because it's too incendiary and it's too likely you'll be called racist. And one of the biggest race baiters in the country is Eric Deggans from the St. Petersburg Times. And I was like, where did he come up with my name? How did this happen? And, you know, of course he didn't.
This was before the widespread use of the internet, right?
Well, you know, the internet was in use, but I had written I think what had happened is I had written a column about he had done this radio show where he talked about going to Sylvia's, this well-known restaurant in Harlem, and being surprised that, you know, middle-class black people were there and they weren't grabbing their crotches and yelling obscenities at the waitresses. You think I'm exaggerating, but that's pretty much what he said. And I and a lot of people wrote columns about how you know, boneheaded that was, but I think that's what set him off. I don't know, because he didn't call me. Of course, or you know, give me a chance to respond. He basically, you know, had this sort of vitriolic thing, and he called me one of the biggest race baiters in the country. So I wound up writing a rebuttal to it that was in the Tampa Bay Times and also in the Huffington Post. And I was telling a friend this while I was working on the book, and he said, "Oh, you got to call your book Race Baiter."
Let's face it, talk about the history of that term, race baiter.
Right. Well, also, I mean, you know, in a way, it was a reference to that story which I tell in the book, but it was also a nod to how the term race baiter has been weaponized over the years. Originally, it was a term that was developed to talk about white politicians who were using race-based appeals to sort of gin up support, particularly in the 1920s and 30s. And, you know, we've talked about that a lot more recently because we've talked about the Confederate statue controversy and the fact that all these statues kind of went up to Confederate generals, not in the wake of the Civil War immediately, but in the 1920s and 30s when, you know, white people were working actively to try and pull back voting rights from black people and institute, you know, these Jim Crow laws. So race baiting sort of emerged as a term back then to talk about white politicians weaponizing racial issues against black people. And, you know, fast forward to when I was doing my book and you had these conservatives like Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly using the term race baiter to refer to people, often people of color, who just wanted to talk about racial issues. Right. And so, you know, because I think these guys know what they're doing, and they realize how they're weaponizing racism. So part of what you try to do is you know, in rhetorical combat, is you try to take your opponent's greatest advantage and you turn it against them. So your opponent's greatest advantage in a fight like this is the moral authority that the civil rights movement has and the moral authority that you have in combating and standing against racism and trying to root it out in society. So if you can make the search to root out racism itself be seen as racist, then that's how you get away with the stuff that these guys have done. So, you know, all of that sort of inspired the title of the book.
Well, and now they kind of call it identity politics, right? That's right. One of the things that they are railing against, identity politics. It's a similar kind of thing. I see it.
Yeah. Well, again, it's always this idea of sort of seeing whiteness as the general average ideal, and anything that departs from that is what you say is identity politics. But in fact, what Donald Trump does is the epitome of identity politics. He creates this identity for his followers that involves supporting him, that involves rejecting, for example, the idea that or accepting the idea that immigrants from Muslim countries might inherently be dangerous, or that non-white immigrants from Mexico and Latin America are inherently a problem, or accepting that African nations are somehow less than European nations. All of this whole set of ideals that go along with this identity that he has created But the core of the identity, of course, is a lockstep, unquestioning support of him and conservative politics. But again, what you do in these rhetorical fights is you always say the other guy is doing this thing that you yourself are doing the most to distract from what you're doing. So people will say, black people and non-white people and even women who want to talk about gender and talk about race, that they're indulging in some kind of identity politics as if politics was ever anything other than that.
Or you're being divisive.
All politics is identity politics.
Even just talking about these things, you're divisive.
Yeah, well, that's, again, if you can get the world to accept that by talking about it, it's divisive, then you've won in a way, because if the system is already in your favor and you're trying to stop people from correcting it, the main thing you want to do is stop people from talking about it and stop smart people from thinking about it.
Now they don't even want us to talk about American history.
Right. Well, they want to redefine it.
They want to, what happened. Yeah, exactly. Because that might make people feel bad. It's divisive, right? So.
Yeah. Well, that's the excuse. But part of it, I'm sure you guys have talked about, part of it is about getting people distracted in a fight that, frankly, we've already had as a nation. We already talked about this stuff decades ago, and already decided that it's important to take a look at our historical roots and correct the record, because that's how you sort of bring fairness to the whole system. And we're relitigating all of these fights because, certain politicians don't want to talk about how insurance is going through the roof, or how, environmental protections need to be bolstered, or how we have, runaway development in this state, but we don't have any kind of mass transit to help with it, or any kind of comprehensive zoning to help with it. It's much harder to talk about those problems, and you're much more likely to come in a conflict with big businesses and big donors. So it's much easier to distract people with this talk about what is Black history and what is critical race theory. And unfortunately, people get hurt in that distraction tactic because Black children get raised in a school system where their history isn't fully acknowledged. Educators are intimidated and constantly coerced, and the state looks like a laughingstock to the rest of the nation. It's all very disappointing.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Wavemakers on WMNF with Janet and Tom, and our guest today is Eric Deggans, who's the TV critic for NPR. If you want to join our conversation or you have a question for Eric, you can call us at 813-239-9663 or send us an email at dj@wmnf.org. We have a couple emails. Bubba, who is a frequent emailer to WMNF. Thanks for the email, Bubba.
Not the Bubba.
Not that Bubba. I don't think so.
I'm sure it's not the Bubba that I covered. It's not the Love Sponge.
The one that loves me so much.
It is not Bubba the Love Sponge. And he says, Eric is a great asset to Tampa and NPR. He wants to know what your take is on the Tim Burke raid. Tim Burke.
Right. I don't know much about it. And Tim is someone who, is an acquaintance. So I sort of feel compromised in that way. I always thought he was a good guy. So I can't really.
I wish his case would get as much attention as that terrible raid on a newspaper in Kansas is getting. That's getting national attention. David Folkenflik has done a piece about it for NPR.
Exactly.
And I'm hoping they'll put some attention on Tim Burke's case because it is outrageous.
And Tim Burke is the Tampa journalist whose home was raided by the FBI and all of his equipment seized after he released some videos that he discovered, revealing things that Tucker Carlson said at Fox that ultimately led to him being dismissed. So,
we don't know that they led to him being dismissed, but
there was
but it did create a controversy.
Yeah, it created a controversy. He was ultimately dismissed.
There
were so many things that could have led to his dismissal. Let's face it.
Yeah, even Carlson says he doesn't know why he was let go. But I mean, anytime law enforcement seizes materials that are owned by a journalist, it deserves extra scrutiny, and we have to be concerned about that. I mean...
well, the Justice Department has policies that require that. For some reason, they weren't followed this time.
Exactly.
I think the U.S. Attorney for the Middle District doesn't understand the internet and how it works and doesn't understand what a journalist is.
Maybe, or is just sort of willfully not paying attention to it, exactly. Which can often be the case.
That's
so
true.
I just, Tim's got lawyers involved, and I'm really hoping that we can sort of get to the bottom of this and get it taken care of.
Before we leave this topic, though, let's talk a little bit more, because you said something that I think is interesting. You talked about black representation on, I think you said TV series. Mm-hmm. And that is the one area that you think has gotten better?
That's one thing that I talk about in the book that I do think has definitely gotten better.
In the last 10 years since the book came out.
In the last 10 years. There was a time when the NAACP was going to sue the broadcast networks because they had advanced, in 1999, they had advanced a slate of fall TV shows where not a single core character in 24 new shows was a person of color. They were all white. And that has definitely changed. We've reached a level of diversity in network television, in cable, in streaming, that's miles ahead of where we were even 10 years ago. And of course, the fights remain. But one of the things that I thought was kind of amazing, I was just thinking about it the other day. I was reviewing this show, Reservation Dogs. Mm-hmm. That's this amazing comedy set in a Native American reservation in Oklahoma. And I remember thinking to myself, there are not one, but there's two shows on the air right now centered on Native American characters. And there have been 3 in the last few years, because there was one on Peacock as well. And, even though, Reservation Dogs is ending, with that third show that I talked about got canceled, Dark Winds, who knows if that's coming back, that's the other show that was on AMC. But there is a sense that these shows have been made, they've shown that there's great value in them, fans like them, and hopefully we will see more of that. And 10 years ago, that would have been a pipe dream to have a major market TV show centered on Native American characters. And so, I'm hopeful, even as we realize that there's more struggle to go.
We mentioned previously how things have, in some ways, though, have gotten worse,
right.
Particularly on cable news. And it's interesting to me that your book was inspired in some ways by Bill O'Reilly, who was replaced by Tucker Carlson, who was like, okay, you think Bill O'Reilly's worse? Let me hold my beer.
Exactly. Fox News said, hold my beer.
Yeah. I mean, he's talking about the great replacement theory. So why?
But again, to me, that's a progression. Sean Hannity, whose show has aired after O'Reilly and Tucker Carlson, and now airs after the replacement of both of those guys, Jesse Waters. There was always questions about, people would appear in that show who seemed to have ties to white supremacist groups. There was always this question about white supremacy sort of hanging in the background of these shows. Laura Ingraham is someone else who's been on Fox News for a long time, and has said a lot of terrible things involving race. So, I don't want to minimize Tucker Carlson because he made it worse, no doubt. But this is something that Fox News has always done. They've always used fear of black people and non-white people to mobilize their audience, which is mostly older and overwhelmingly white.
And you mentioned in the book how they use fear,
right.
Especially crime, and we don't have cable at home, but I do go to the gym and I see Fox on the TV right next to CNN, and it's amazing watching the difference between the two. And there's constant clips on Fox of some crime going on in, a city run by Democrats. And somehow they're always black people.
Somehow.
But it does seem like it's gotten worse.
Well, it's gotten more obvious, most definitely. And I do think it has seeped into the news programming more. One of the things that Roger Ailes, who was the founder of Fox News and who was eventually forced out over sexual harassment allegations and then died soon after, one of the things that Roger Ailes always tried to do was do this little two-step where opinionators would say, very ideological things, but he tried to keep the news reporting separate from that. And he also tried hard to keep Fox News independent from the GOP in a way that they could retain their power. And since Ailes has first left the company and then died, I think Fox News has let that line blur even more. And you'll see reporting during America's Newsroom and during what's supposed to be their news hours that's really completely ideological. And they've let themselves get in bed with the GOP and conservative politicians in a way that I think Ailes would have resisted if he was still at the channel. But it's all part of how things have just gotten more intense and gotten more obvious and gotten more in your face. It's all a progression. And like I said, eventually the code words are going to completely fall away. But for some reason, nowadays, even white supremacists don't like to be called racist. So there you go.
Well, you mentioned, that's a good point you bring up in the book, is sometimes people say things that are racist. That doesn't mean they're racist.
Right.
I think
especially because we are all inside this society that elevates white culture in 1,000 different ways that we don't realize. And so if you just let that process work on you without examining it, things will come out of your mouth, or you will think about things a certain way. That's a product of that system more than it is a product of your conscious thought. And part of the big challenge in writing this book, and then in giving talks connected to it, and in the work that I do on NPR, is trying to get people to take these actions and thoughts that they've always viewed as innocuous and say, there's a deeper meaning to it. And also, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you're just part of this system that we're all a part of, and we're all trying to figure out how to stop contributing to it, how to starve it of attention and of agency. And it takes conscious thought, and it takes thinking about things that might make you feel uncomfortable, where you say, oh man, I did that, or oh man, I thought that way, or oh, I did this thing. I crossed the street when there were black people walking towards me, or, I'm the guy at church who doesn't go over to the new black family and say hi to them, or, whatever. I'm the person who looks weird at people who come to my rental who have, ethnic sounding names.
Well, I think sometimes people just don't even know what is offensive. An example for myself is I posted something on TikTok and called somebody my spirit animal, and then and then I did the classic thing, got on a plane, went out of the country, and then woke up, and all of a sudden my TikTok has just completely blown up with people criticizing me for using the term spirit animal, which I had never. I thought I was flattering somebody, but I was offending others.
Right. Because there are some Native American people who object to
Right. So it was a whole big discussion among people, but I had no idea, and it was like, okay, I now know. Won't do it again. I understand. So.
Exactly, and part of, I think part of the process is trying not to figure out if somebody's racist or not, or impugn somebody's motives when you're looking at a situation like that. In the same way that, people say, well, Donald Trump said X, Y, and Z, so he must be racist. I sort of say, I don't care if Donald Trump is racist or not. That's a matter between him and his psychiatrist or whatever. But there's what you do, and there's how you react when people sort of bring it to you and say this is a problem.
Right.
If you make a mistake and people come to you and say, hey, this is kind of a mistake, and is there, could you say this a different way, or could you do this a different way? And your response is, hey, I didn't realize, I'm going to do things better next time. That's wonderful, and it indicates that you're a part of the process in a productive way. If your response is, forget you, and you're just trying to make me feel bad, and I know what I meant, and that's not what I meant. Well, it's not about what you meant. It's about the power that your words have when they leave your mouth and they go out into the world and they interact with other people. And the only way you're going to learn how to deal with these situations better is to listen to people when they come to you and say, that something's wrong. And, one big feature, of course, of white supremacy is believing that white people's perceptions of everything are the perceptions of everything. So part of breaking that down is to get people to understand that just because you think something isn't a problem doesn't mean that it isn't a problem. And ultimately, you ask people, would you prefer to have a whole group of people out there thinking that you're prejudiced or racist or insensitive because of something you said, or would you prefer to just correct it, even if you think whatever you said was completely innocuous and not worthy of criticism?
similar to this point, Tom will remember the name of the author, and I can't remember his name, but he wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Kenji.
Ibram Kendi.
Ibram Kendi, yeah. And he talks about that, people say racist things, do racist things. Are they a racist? One way to deal with that is to not label people and let them, like you said, if somebody says something insensitive or inappropriate, they're not a bad person. They maybe just don't know better.
Yeah, because labeling people has two problems to it. The first is that people resist the conversation because they don't see themselves as racist. So it doesn't make sense to them if you say, hey, you said something problematic. Well, I'm not a racist, so I couldn't possibly have said something problematic. But if you come to somebody and you say, you can say problematic things and not be racist, then that opens up the conversation. and also it just makes it less punitive. It makes it less about a gotcha, you said something and I'm going to make you feel terrible because of it, or I'm going to try and get you canceled. I think one thing that people don't understand who are just sort of bystanders in this conversation is that when you resist having that conversation, you force the person who believes that an injustice has been done to ratchet up the conversation in order to get your attention or in order to get the situation addressed. Let's say that happened in a workplace where you used the term spirit animal in a workplace, and somebody who was Native American objected to it, came to you and said, hey, it'd be better if you didn't do that. And you said, hey, I didn't mean anything by it. I'm not going to change how I use it. Okay, now you force that person to go to your boss and say, she's using this term that my people think is, in a way that my people think is offensive. It's making the workplace harder for me. And then you force your boss to take action. Well, that kind of thing can happen out in the world, too. If you resist having these conversations, you force people to be more overt and aggressive in how they register their disapproval in order to get the situation dealt with. And that's where we get to these situations where we have really escalating friction and arguments and protests and things like that. Especially I found in the TV industry when I wrote about when racist things or prejudiced things would happen on TV shows, I always thought to myself, if these producers would just admit that they screwed up and have a conversation with people like me and change it, it would solve things. And we saw that happen last week when a contestant on Big Brother used the N-word in a casual conversation. The producers, her fans noticed it on Wednesday. The producers put out a statement, I think by the end of the day, saying the guy was going to be taken out of the show. And the very next day, they showed him being called into what they call their diary room, where they talked to the producers, and the guy was never heard from again. and they basically issued a statement saying, hey, he used a racial slur. We've told people that we have a no tolerance policy for that kind of thing. And so we pulled him out of the show rather than trying to pretend it didn't happen, trying to explain it away, trying to avoid the conversation, all of which Big Brother has done in the past, and I write about in my book. This time, they just faced it, they admitted it, and they dealt with it. And now fans of the show are like, hey, they finally did the right thing. This is great. People are applauding them for taking the right action rather than criticizing them for trying to avoid the conversation.
And so this goes to me, one of the issues with Ron DeSantis. He likes to talk about never backing down. He's never going to back down. He's never going to admit a mistake or perhaps a misjudgment, and that goes to the education of in black history. I mean, they have been attacked by every angle here on this idea that they're going to teach middle school kids that, racism, slavery wasn't that bad. They learned important skills, and he won't back down. He will not.
Well, again, sort of the question is, what's the point of what he's doing? Is the point of what he's doing to improve the state's education system, or is the point of what he's doing to create a talking point so that as he's running for president, he can go to the Republican base and say, I defeated woke ideology in the classroom? Right. If your purpose is to create a talking point for a campaign, then of course you're not going to back down. And of course that's what the base loves, is leaders who never back down. But those of us who have covered government and those of us who've lived a minute know that if you never back down, that's the worst kind of leadership. And one of the things that worries me the most about our current political situation is that we have these politicians who are fostering a terrible sense of how to lead, focusing on these picayune arguments that, society had largely settled in the past, rather than talking about things like climate change. I mean, Hawaii is burning down. And we are sitting here talking about how to teach Black history when we know how to teach Black history. And frankly, Ron DeSantis should be focusing our energy and our ideas and our intellect on real problems that really need solving, not forcing us to relitigate things that we already decided as a country in a way that, by the way, also harms a lot of people. It's just really discouraging.
I just want to remind folks that our guest is Eric Deggans, TV critic at NPR, and if you want to join our conversation or have a
I promise I'm going to talk about TV at some point.
The number is 8. He's also the author of Race Baiter, how the media wields words to divide us, to divide a nation. I'm probably getting the subhead not
How
right.
The media wields dangerous words to divide a nation.
Divide a Nation.
Available on Amazon.
And if you would like to ask Eric a question, the number is 813-239-9663, or you can send us an email to dj@wmnf.org. And that is just what Robert Ross did. He sent us an email, and he wants to know, Eric, do you think Fox will lose much audience after being exposed as cynical liars and lawsuit losers?
No.
No.
I think they lost audience because Tucker Carlson left, and the way in which Tucker Carlson left angered a lot of his fans, and they've been slowly rebuilding that audience, installing Jesse Waters, who is one of their more popular up-and-coming hosts in Carlson's old time slot, and kind of rebuilding. And I think the audience has maybe rebounded by something like 60% or something like that.
Wasn't there actually a period of when they... A lot of conservatives, I think, were turning on Fox because they weren't supporting Donald Trump enough. I know that they weren't. They weren't left, they were not right enough. They're going to like Newsmax and stuff.
I think that's always been a tough line that Fox has had to walk. Where, again, like I said, Roger Ailes always tried to have a level of independence so that the Fox News Channel wouldn't be caught in the situation that it's in now, where a huge portion of the base is supportive of Donald Trump and rejects any attempt to criticize him or undermine him. And you can get the sense that Rupert Murdoch and the people running Fox don't want to be yoked to Donald Trump the way they are, but they are. And Donald Trump can kind of call the shots with them in a way that I'm sure makes them uncomfortable, and that Roger Ailes would have resisted mightily. But here we are, and the surest proof of that is not just that Tucker Carlson was let go, but all of these disclosures in the result of the Dominion lawsuit revealed that the pundits and journalists at Fox News did not believe Donald Trump when he said that the election was stolen from him, and they did not believe that Donald Trump should have been recognized as the president in 2020, and of course that is all counter to what the base believes, because they were going on the air and telling them something totally different. So I think one reason why they also lost viewers was because the viewers felt betrayed, because there were all these text messages and emails that showed that personalities at Fox didn't believe what Donald Trump was telling his followers. This election was rigged, and the presidency was stolen from me.
And it's kind of a good segue to another topic, which is fact-checking, which I'd like to talk about. But then also, when you wrote this book back in 2011, you're right, there was... 2012. We had Twitter and Facebook, but it was not fully developed into what it was going to become. We did not have not as many people were writing online, and just armchair journalists, so to speak, amateur journalists. If you were writing that book now, how might it be different in incorporating all this new media and all this new information that we have out there?
Well, a lot of the stuff was there. I think I joined Twitter in 2007. But one of the things I don't think we realized was the negative possibility of this social media world. Like, we knew about trolls and we knew that there were mischief makers out there. We didn't realize that Facebook could be this gigantic influence on elections and on public sentiment in the way that it has been. One of the things that, academics did was they took a look at the messaging around the election when Hillary Clinton was running against Trump. And what they found was that negative messaging against Hillary Clinton, had a much longer shelf life on social media platforms like Facebook, and that people were much more willing to pass along and believe messaging that uplifted Donald Trump and criticized Hillary Clinton than the reverse. And a lot of that messaging was rooted in misinformation and disinformation. And Facebook didn't have a real robust system for reining that in. And that also happened, of course, on Twitter. And other social media platforms. And so that's one thing I don't think we really realized was like the organized weaponization of misinformation in order to bring political results in this country and other countries. We didn't realize that. And one of the things I noticed, because I was a victim of it, was that Fox News might air something that mischaracterized a story or a column I wrote or something like that, and then it would move out into this alternate universe of conservative-oriented media platforms where people would do posts on, YouTube, and they would write on their blogs, and there would be all these people talking about what Fox News said about something, rather than clicking on the link and reading the column and coming to their own conclusion. And it was all part of this gigantic system that was aimed at ginning up anger, ginning up really engagement by ginning up anger, and that's how they make money. And everybody's in on it, but it's this giant alternative media ecosystem that is filled with false information and misleading reporting. And that's another thing that I don't think we really anticipated when I was writing my book back then.
We've got a phone call. We've got Nancy in St. Pete who's on the line. We're going to take Nancy's phone call, and if you want to join our conversation or ask Eric a question, NPR TV critic and author of Race Baiter.
This is a pre-recorded show. We're not taking calls this hour.
Hi, thanks for taking my call, and it's so nice to have this gentleman on the. He knows what he's talking about, and that's that. You always have great people. But anyway, I just want to point out that so many of the politicians think that there's a dichotomy, and there really is, between entertainment and politics, and that was made on purpose, I believe, to confuse people, because. When really where the rubber meets the road, when they're in court, they say, well, I said, they said what they said as entertainment, and not, they don't have to tell the truth. And somehow that's become okay. But of course, so they're not held responsible as a politician should for telling the truth. And that is where there's so much confusion comes from. Because if they told the truth, all this wouldn't be happening. But it's touted as entertainment. They can lie because that's entertainment. But but if it's on the record, in the congressional record, they're not supposed to do that. You know what I mean?
Well, what's interesting is you use the word politician, but the tactic you're talking about was a defense that was used by Tucker Carlson when he was an anchor on Fox News, and their lawyers said that the assertions that he was making were just entertainment. But this is what they do. They format their presentation to make it look like a news broadcast. So the person who's speaking is wearing a suit and a tie. They are speaking behind a desk. They're on a set that looks like the set of a news program. They have graphics over their shoulders, the same way that, Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite used to have. And they're trying to usurp the credibility and the buy-in with the audience that newscasters would have, but they don't want any of the ethical responsibility that comes with actually being a journalist. So whenever anyone tries to hold them to account, they always say, well, I'm not a journalist, I'm an entertainer. I'm not a journalist, I'm a pundit. But, as someone who's gotten paid to deliver opinions for over 20 years, I can tell you there's a code of ethics for opinionators, too. And you do have to be an honest broker, and you do have to be accurate, and you do have to be fair. So, even on those standards, even if you accept that Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham and all these people are not journalists, they are opinionators working in the media space, and they should be held to standards of accuracy and ethics that, frankly, I don't think they meet right now.
Nancy, thank you for the call.
And, okay, I just wanted one other point is that most people are not that sophisticated to pick up on that.
Sure,
absolutely.
That's where it all happened.
Yeah, that's actually the purpose of it. They know many people aren't sophisticated enough to understand.
To understand, they're not critical thinkers.
Nancy.
We've got another call. We've got Simon in Lakeland. Simon in Lakeland, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hi, a couple points. My first point is a quote by Ronald Klain, who was the chief staff advisor for Joe Biden. It's from Vox of July 14th of 2014. 68% of Americans think elections are rigged. Twitter, Ronald Klain. That's because they are. That's his quote. Now, my question to the guest is, 70-some million people voted for Donald Trump, many of them highly educated. 82 roughly million voted for Joe Biden, the highest of any presidential candidate previously. Approximately more than 12 million than the first black elected president. My question is, Joe Biden wrote a book by two Associate Press based on the life with Joe Biden, the most esteemed individual to be elected president. As they say, behind every great man is a greater woman. How am I to think when she sold her book that of the 82 million people who voted for this individual, Joe Biden, she only sold 250 copies in the first week?
Who are you talking about?
Joe Biden's book.
Jill Biden's book only
Jill
sold.
Biden. Okay.
His wife.
So my question is, why 82 million people vote for her husband? Not too many people are interested in their relationship with only 250 copies sold the first week. And in addition, what does one think Jeff Zuckerberg got for his $400 million investment? So you try to put all these issues together, not a conspiracy, just trying to think, are there irregularities in the election?
Simon, thanks for the call. Let's
little tough to follow that reasoning. One thing I will point out is that Ron Klain quote that he delivered, Ron Klain was talking about gerrymandering. And he was saying that elections are rigged in favor of incumbents because of gerrymandering, not because the tabulation of votes is rigged in some way. It's because people are herded into districts that favor incumbents, and because the districts are drawn by politicians.
Right, exactly.
And the result is
so Ron Klain did write that tweet, but he was talking about
the result is laws that are more extreme than the electric really would be if you allowed them to.
The result is a chamber that is also impervious or increasingly resistant to the idea that they could get voted out if they do something that their constituents don't like, because they're in districts where they're almost guaranteed to be reelected.
Now there is. In your book, you write there's a hunger for more even-handed material and some guidance for sorting the news from the noise. And I think that's maybe even more true today than it was then. I spoke to the Ybor Rotary Club recently about the spiraling death of newspapers.
That's just what we were talking about, the commentary versus the news.
Yeah, so what do you, and our friend John here operating the board wonders what we can do as consumers to influence this. Is there anything we can do?
Yeah, there's a few things you can do. First, you can find news outlets that you think are doing a great job and support them financially.
Like WMNF.
Like WMNF. like NPR and public media. I don't know if I can say another radio station's call letters on the air, so I won't. But if you can give to NPR affiliates, if you can give to community radio stations, if you can give to newspapers that you think are doing a great job, subscribe to them even if you don't read the newspaper every day. If you can give to PBS stations, public media, I think is a great area where we have very strong ethical standards. We try really hard for balance. We're working really hard to emphasize news over opinionating, even though I'm somebody who opinionates for NPR. There's not many people at NPR whose job involve that. The great bulk of our newsroom is about news reporting and factual analysis. So that's one way you can help. The other way is that you can speak out in your social media platforms and support journalists and journalism who are doing great work. The other thing that you absolutely have to do is, I always tell media consumers that they have never had more power than they have right now. You can see something on television or read something in a newspaper. You can put up a tweet about it. It can attract the interest of hundreds of thousands of people, and it can eventually pressure whatever media outlet, issued that report into reconsidering what they did if you were criticizing it. You have a lot of power, but that also means that you have to put a little more effort and energy into sorting out media outlets and making sure that they deserve your patronage. So it's not enough to just show up to Fox News and let that programming wash over you. Watch what Fox News does. Watch what CNN does. Watch what MSNBC does. Listen to NPR. Listen to PBS. There's somebody who does regular analysis of Fox News programming, and they put it right next to the subjects that are covered every day on the PBS NewsHour. And what you find on the NewsHour is there's this wide range of stories that cover things that are happening domestically and internationally, a bunch of different kinds of reporting. And then when you look at Fox, there's like 5 or 6 stories that get talked about all the time. Mm-hmm. And that's how a lot of modern cable TV news channels work, because they realize they don't want you to turn away. And if they focus on the same 5 stories that everybody's interested in, people won't turn away as quickly. But then you don't get informed. If that's your only source of news, you don't get informed about what's happening in the world. So you have to do a little more work. And you, as an audience member, have to consume a wider range of news outlets so that you have a better idea. Because right now, it comes down to even the individual people. There are some reporters on CNN that whose work I would trust less than some reporters on Fox News. But you don't really understand or get to know who you can trust and who does good work unless you get out there and you experience a lot of it and you kind of compare.
You also write a lot in your book about diversity and the importance of diversity. Can you talk briefly, because diversity, equity, and inclusion is becoming a dirty word in the Republican Party, which is shocking to me because it has taken root in corporate America. Businesses are very invested in diversity, equity, and inclusion because it helps their bottom line. Can you talk about how that affects news coverage, though?
Sure. Well, again, to me, diversity is part of and parcel of accuracy. If you're going to go cover a news event, then you have to have a diversity of people involved in covering that news event, or you're going to miss part of it. One of the things that we realized when we went to cover the Uvalde shooting at NPR was that if you didn't have entree into Spanish speakers and Latino culture, you were going to miss a big part of that story, because so many of the kids who were killed and injured in that horrific attack were Latino. And like so many cities, there's sort of white culture and then there's Latino culture in the same city, and they see things differently sometimes. So if you're just focused on the people who speak English and you're just focused on white culture when you cover that story, you're going to miss a lot of important nuance. One of the things we discovered in covering the wildfires in Hawaii is that there are some people who live there who don't even like the use of the term the Big Island. And so if you're not aware that there are some people who live there who see that as an insulting term, and you don't figure out how to massage, how you use that, then the people who live there, there's going to be some people who will tune out your reporting because they automatically know you don't know them as well as they want you to know them. So diversity, in my sense, people often try to dismiss diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives as a political correctness or something people are doing to avoid criticism, and somehow it's going to bring down the quality of everything. But what it does is it increases the quality by making things more accurate, by including more perspectives, by being fairer. That's why it's so important. And, you know, there are some politicians and some political movements that are trying to demonize that term because, as I said earlier, what do you do in rhetorical combat? You try to find the strongest weapons that your enemy has, and you try to turn them into liabilities. And the moral authority of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in addition to how it is more effective, how it increases the accuracy of reporting and how it makes things better, like that's the strongest argument for it. So you try to convince people that that's not a reality so that you can demonize the word and then people stop using it.
We've got just about 5 minutes left, so let's talk a little bit about TV.
Sure.
We got an email from Robert Ross, who goes by Bob Ross. He says there's a glut of streaming subscription channels and a corresponding overload of movies. You can't keep up, and the Emmys have become a worse joke than ever. 2 questions. So do you see a thinning of the herd after the strike ends? And about that strike, how does it end?
Well, Bob, I love you. But I'm going to disagree that things are worse than they have ever been, or that the Emmys are worse than they've ever been. As someone who's covered the Emmys a lot, they're not. But there is a lot of great material out there. I think what we're going to find is that the streaming services are going to start to run out of new material because of the Hollywood strikes. Of course, the Writers Guild of America went on strike, I think, in July. Was it in July? It might have been earlier than that. Writers Guild of America went on strike, and then right after that, not long after that, the Screen Actors Guild went on strike. So Hollywood writers and actors have not been working. They have not been making new material. They have not been promoting material that's already made. And what that has meant, people haven't noticed it as much because the big streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime have enough material to get through the year.
Well, people are watching Suits now.
Well, people are watching Suits because A, it's a good show, and B, because Netflix put it in a position to where it was pushing it at people. Yeah. Anything that gets featured when you boot up the app is automatically going to do huge numbers. But Suits is a great show. I'm glad people are paying attention to it. But what's happening is the streaming services are starting to run out of new material, and we'll see in the beginning of 2024 that they'll really start the cupboards will really start looking bare. Right now, I believe the writers are talking with the production companies now. They've resumed talks. So I think the smart money in Hollywood is thinking that there might be a resolution in October or November. Mm-hmm. If that happens, there'll still be damage. There'll still be a lot of damage. I mean, broadcast television, all the shows that people love, like NCIS, all the scripted shows they love, like NCIS and The Equalizer and stuff like that, they haven't been able to come back because they weren't able to make new episodes. And getting that restarted is going to be really hard. But it will be less damaging than if we get to 2024 and there's no production. If that happens, the wheels could actually come off of the entertainment business, and we could see some very big companies struggle financially, have to lay off many more people, and it'll be much harder for everything to recover. So I think everyone in Hollywood is hoping there's a resolution by the end of the year, and that's what I'm betting on.
We got 90 seconds left, but we've got Alvaro on the line. Alvaro, what's on your mind? You got 30 seconds.
Thank you for the wonderful program today. I wanted to mention that in talking about DEI as it relates to education, I think we need to mention the Tampa 5. These 5 young women at USF who were demonstrating in support of DEI and against DeSantis' attacks on education. They were attacked by campus police and the local sheriff, and now they face 5 to 10 years in jail for demonstrating.
Alvaro, thanks for that reminder. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to hang up because we've got just a few seconds left for the show, but I appreciate it very much.
And that's a good reminder because that's a case worth watching.
Most definitely.
Well, Eric, thanks so much for being with us today. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
So much fun. We could talk for another hour. We didn't even talk about the Emmys.
I know.
Right. We had
except I just got to disagree with Bob. They're better than they have been.
Irene, thanks for answering the phones. And we had media savvy John Dunn here running the board for us. We appreciate it very much. Up
no
next,
sound effects, though.
No sound effects.
No sound effects at
Up
all.
next is alternative radio, followed by great music by Harrison Nash. This is WMNF Tampa.